didn't realize that until I started preparing. One of the most important parts of Hilchot Shabbat. We were going to do 3 melachot. We were going to do tochen, meraked, and lash, which are grinding, sifting, and lash means to knead. These are the melachot in the order that we're going to be learning then. However, it turns out to be that in this melacha of tochen is included the whole area of cures and medication and health issues that pertain to Shabbat. So tonight we're going to be spending most of the time on the majority of the halachot of refuah, what one can do and what one cannot do if somebody's sick, how sick, what can he do, what can he ask a goy do for him. So the whole back is full of just English, no Hebrew, there's no room for the Hebrew. So we're going to go through a little bit of the basic halachot of tochen and how it applies, also an important melacha. But the refuah is very, very large, and we may not do all the details, but at least you'll have a good idea, hopefully, after the shiur of what is permissible and what's not. Okay, so let's begin with tochen. Tochen is the next step after the field has been harvested, the crop, whether it's wheat or barley, has been all gathered. It has been threshed, which meant to separate the chaff from the kernels. There was winnowing to remove through the wind any of the hay, the straw, right? And afterwards we had borer, which was to additionally remove any pebbles or stones that might be mixed. Borer meaning with the hand, to really do a good cleaning, a thorough cleaning. And now we're holding by tochen. So you have all the grain, now you want to grind it. And remember, these melachot that were in the Mishkan could have been for a dual purpose. Either it was to grind the flour to eventually make the lechem apanim, that special bread, Mishkan, or to grind the various herbs and plants to make the dyes and the colorings of the garments and so forth. Regardless, grinding was one of the melachot. What's involved in grinding is taking a solid, something which is solid, and breaking it up into particles, into pieces, very small pieces. But don't make the mistake that any time you cut, it's called tochen. Tochen implies that what you have right now, after you've ground this food, is something completely different than before. Something which has a new use in its present state. So if you take a tomato and you cut it into 4, it's the same thing. You did not really make something different. But we're going to see that may not be the case when you mash the fruits or vegetables, or when you grind it, or you dice them very, very, very small pieces. That's a whole different story, because even if it's not tochen, in the way we understand tochen to be, because it resembles tochen, it's very close of being tochen. There are just quite a few ways to accomplish the same feat as grinding. We're used to grinding perhaps with a special tool that grinds everything to small particles. It doesn't have to be small particles necessarily. As long as it resembles the same melacha, and it basically takes what you had before and brings it into a new state, and in that new state it serves the purpose, then it might be tochen, it might be asur. So a quick example of where tochen would apply. It would apply not only in food items, but it would apply even with wood, stones, by chopping into bits. For example, or chopping into bits, straw to make. You want to cut the straw to make small pieces to use it in a basket, or just chop wood, lumber, into very, very small bits. So you could use it, to throw as landscaping, to cover. So you're cutting or you're chopping the wood and you're making of it something which is useful in its new state. That could also be called tochen, even though you may be using some other tool, not a grinder. That would be called tochen. Another type of tochen can be, depending what's involved, mi'uch, or crushing something. Some of these words might be synonymous. I just use various words. Yeah, I'm going to get to that. There could be all synonymous, but they mean almost the same, but it depends what's involved. Mi'uch is usually used for bananas, for example. There's a question of whether you're allowed to mash a banana, because that may be considered grinding. Some, especially Ashkenazim who follow the Chazon Ish, are very strict with this. We're not so strict, but I'll tell you nevertheless, because we consider everybody that what we do when you want to mash a fruit or a vegetable. In other words, we take precautions, because if it's called tochen, you don't want to be over, transgress on something which is against the Torah. So we take precautions. But this is just an idea of what tochen is. It can be kitut, or chopping to bits. It can be crushing, or mi'uch, or it can be, I wrote dak in Hebrew, or mincing and dicing. What that means is anybody who makes Israeli salad knows that what he needs to do is to dice it or make it very, very small. chop the onions very, very small. You can't do that on Shabbat. Wait a second. Wait. There's an exception. It's down here. It's called for immediate use. Okay? Now, I shouldn't say most, a lot of people don't chop or dice any fruits or vegetables very, very small, regardless of if you're going to use it immediately or what you're going to do with it, because it resembles tochen. So first, in describing what tochen is, you have to have these concepts in mind, that it could be any one of these, but there are exceptions, and not every one of the opinions is strict about every one of them, depending on what's involved, okay? But these are all similar to tochen, and they can be construed as tochen, depending on how you do it, because we don't have anywhere written in the old sources of what size it needs to be. Small particles, big, not necessarily. We don't have that shiur. All we know is that if you're transforming what you had originally to a new use, if that new use is useful, in the same way or better than it was before, it can be called tochen, regardless of the tool that you use. So dak is a problem, and we stay away from doing it very small. You can have salads, you can cut up a tomato, you can cut up any fruits and vegetables, as long as it's not too small that it looks like small particles, then it really resembles tochen. The same thing with risuk. That word is used a lot with agvanyot, with tomatoes. Resek agvanyot, to make tomato sauce. We don't make tomato sauce by pounding it, by creating this new entity here, a tomato sauce instead of a tomato. Because what we're accomplishing by the pounding, or by the mashing, you can call it too, is tomato sauce. So we don't do those. We don't do that either. Or ktisha, any form of, risuk was mashing, and ktisha was pounding. Right. Good example. Now, if the avocado is very, very soft already, it's not so much of a problem. The problem is when the avocado is still hard, and you want to smear it, you want to be able to smear it on the bread. That could be a form of grinding, because to get it to that state, you have to really, really squeeze it hard. So I will tell you what to do in a moment, how to go about it. But nevertheless, that's a good example. It is mentioned, avocados and the like that are hard, and in order for you to be able to use it, you want to smash it or pound it. And that may be a problem. So before we go and see how to eat our food on Shabbat, let's just keep in mind that there are various klalim in tochen. These are the three klalim. Well, actually we have more. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. The first klal in tochen, in order for it to be tochen, it has to be gidublei karka. It has to grow from the ground. Fruits and vegetables grow from the ground. So a tochen would only apply to that which grows from the ground. What does this come to exclude? It does not come to exclude stones, because you can be tochen stones, which are left towards the end. As I mentioned that I already talked about it. Remember we said before, it could be anything. It could be stone, it could be wood. Not because they grow from the ground, because they are transformed into pebbles, into something which is useful. That stone or that brick, once you make it into small particles that can be used in some way, it's called tochen too. So you cannot crush stones on Shabbat. But gidulei karka is an exception or a rule that's used when we're talking about food. There are two types of food. Those that grow from the ground, and those foods that do not grow from the ground. Anybody know what I'm talking about? What food does not grow from the ground? Meat, cheese, eggs, right? Liver, fish, right? These 5 that I just mentioned, right? These are the 5 typical food items that do not grow from the ground. And since they do not grow from the ground, if you cook them, if they're cooked, that's very important. The meat is cooked, the fish is cooked, you can grind it. You cannot use a grinder. You basically could use any of these tools that you ordinarily use to chop it up. You can chop liver, make chopped liver on Shabbat, no problem. There's no tochen on something which is not gidulei karka. What is that? Well, obviously there's some things that you are better off preparing before Shabbat, because there may be some problems. So even without using a regular grinder, which is not used on Shabbat already, but there are other ways to accomplish the grinding. If it's not something which is a gidulei karka, there's no problem. Now you can use something called an egg slicer. Even though an egg slicer is chopping it very, very thinly, it's for eggs, not a problem, first of all. And second of all an egg slicer is a bunch of knives. In other words, it's not something which is, doesn't resemble tochen in reality. And it's something which is not gidulei karka anyway. So you can do that, you can do it with the fish, with the meat, as long as it's cooked. If it's raw meat, muktzah. What do you do with raw meat on Shabbat, right? So you can't grind raw meat on Shabbat, because it's not food at this moment. Even though some people eat it raw, but that's not considered food. Because it's not considered food yet, you would not be able to grind it. But all the other items I mentioned that are not food, that do not grow from the ground, it will be permissible to chop it up. So that's the first condition for tochen. In order for it to be a problem of tochen, it would have to go from the second condition of tochen is that there's no tochen achar tochen. You bake some cookies, right, and you want to break it up. That's not called tochen. There's already been some grinding before, right, with the cookies, with the flour. So there's no tochen achar tochen. You cannot chop it again. The most important conditions that we want to be aware of are the last two, miyad and shinui. There are quite a few commentaries and quite a few opinions that hold that just like in borer, we have the right to be borer ochen mitoch solet, that which we want and that which we do not want. If it's for immediate use, we're about to eat, the same would apply with the tochen. If you're going to be doing it and you're going to be immediately eating, that's the way you want to eat it, then that's a form of derech achila. It's a form of that's the way you eat it. So there's nothing wrong with it. There shouldn't be anything wrong with it. Some, of course, don't agree with it. They say that this does not apply to tochen in the same way that it applies to borer. So what do? We use the last two rules together. There's something called shinui. If you do it with shinui, it's not called tochen. Let's say you have a potato that's already cooked. Oh, by the way, as I mentioned cooked, if a fruit or vegetable has been cooked already, so it's already been softened, the our opinion as a whole that there's no more tochen anyway. It's already soft enough that even if you mash it more, you're not accomplishing anything more. But anyway, you have a potato. You want to make mashed potato. You use the back of the fork. Same thing with the banana. You do it with a shinui, with a change. Shinui means not the ordinary way that you would do it during the week. So you mash it with the back of a spoon, the back of a fork. There's no other way to do it, and the child wants his banana mashed. You can do it with a fork too, right? Because we're lenient with that opinion that holds that if you're doing it la'achila, you're doing it immediately, it's okay. But we also apply the shinui, because shinui, everybody agrees that if you have the two, then the chances are that it's okay. It's letzorech achila, miyad, right? You're doing it with the shinui, with the back, with the handle, then it would be okay, it would be permissible. Then we have something called a megared, a grater, the grate. We don't use it on Shabbat. The grater, because what you're doing, in some ways, the grater is also a tochen, in some ways, because it's making it into very small bits. But even if it's not, even if it's okay because we hold that you can do it in yad, right? The problem with the grater is a class of its own. There is a class in Shabbat, a category called ovda or ovdin dehol. Something which is done during the week, we don't do on Shabbat. It resembles the same way I do it and I process it during the week. So Shabbat, I want to do it differently. I don't want it to appear as though I'm working on Shabbat. So even though it may not be a melacha, it may not be prohibited, there are some things that we do not do on Shabbat because it resembles the way we would do it during the week. And this is a very particular kli that's used during the week for a particular job, right? The grater. So we do not use graters on Shabbat. So we don't use it on Shabbat. Okay, so far we thought that tochen is very easy. We just don't do certain things that resemble grinding. And unless we follow the leniency of miyad, that we're going to eat it right away. We do it with a shinu, which is very helpful. There are at times, however, that we may forget or slip and not realize that the action that we're doing resembles them. And I put just one example here that we should keep in mind, and this can happen. Walking in the mud, by the time you reach home, that mud has dried, right? You cannot remove that mud if it's dry from the shoes, because by removing it, by scraping it, you may be grinding or doing something which resembles grinding of the boats. It wasn't ground before. It was dirt. It hardened, right? Not exactly, but it was never ground. It was in its original state before, right? The way it was, but it was never ground by someone. It had to have been ground. Okay, I'm not going to say that this is necessarily something which is for sure doraita, but because it resembles, we definitely do not do this. Right? So don't you know what the Japanese and Koreans do? They take off the shoes at the entrance. Anyway, now obviously there are ways to get that mud out. You just have to be careful not to scrape it. Maybe you can do something else to remove it. Wash it with what? No, that's something else. No. If you need to, the best way that we take care of this problem is we use our foot next to some stone. Just, like this, we're not mechaven at least to grind it, and we're not careful to scrape it off. If it comes off, it comes off. We don't have to be 100% clean when it comes to the heel of the shoe. All you want to avoid is entering your home or somebody else's home with dirt on your shoe. That's all. So you clean it off a little bit or with a towel, but don't scrape it, because by scraping it, you are making small little particles, and it's a form, or it resembles at least tochen, and it would be asur. Okay, so this is all about tochen. Now, the rabbis tell us that because in the olden days, the way medication was made was by grinding herbs, even though that may not be the case today, all medication is asur on Shabbat. Miderabanan, by rabbinic decree, Shema yavo lishchok samemanim, because you make time to grind samemanim, various herbs and plants, in order to get that medication. So because medication is included in Tochen, we're going to talk about health matters and sicknesses. Alright, there's no particular order here, but we have to start somewhere. So let's begin with that all types of medication, regardless of what it is, whether it's a solid, a tablet, or whether it's a liquid, or whether it's an ointment, all types. If it's a medication, it heals, it's a form of medicine, it's a asur miderabanan for the reason of Shema yavo lishchok samemanim, you make time to grind. Now, even though today we don't grind, and nobody goes to his backyard and grabs some herbs and grinds them and makes medication, that decree remains. Because that was the possibility back then, the Chachamim said, we don't take medication on Shabbat because of that gezerah. We don't do so today, even though the gezerah does not appear to apply anymore, it still continues to be in effect. So it applies to any form. And maybe I'll skip around a little bit. When I say any form, it means even something like exercise. We do not exercise on Shabbat. First of all, we don't want to overwork yourself. You don't want to run anywhere and overwork yourself and sweat. You have to rest on Shabbat. But if the exercise that you're doing, not just doing this, to your wrists and your fingers, but major exercise, working out, is a form of health matter, we do not do exercise on Shabbat. So when we say all type, we mean anything that cures, as opposed to what? As opposed to something called preventative, which I'll talk about later. If what you're doing will prevent an illness, well, not necessarily. So an immediate exception that we have to medication is something called derech habrinim, or way of the healthy. What that means is that, let's say, and I wrote it at the very end here, hot tea and lemon and honey. Let's say you have a sore throat. You can't take whatever they sell at the drugstore, right, for the sore throat, because it's a medication. Are you allowed to drink tea, hot tea with milk, with honey? No problem. Why? Even though it may heal, it may cure, it may be a good thing to do, because people drink hot tea anyway, whether they're sick or not. So nobody can tell why you're drinking it. Even though you know yourself that this may help you, that's okay. Normally people drink hot tea with milk, with lemon, or with honey, or with both. So because something is done ordinarily, and it's not necessarily being done to cure, it's done for other reasons too. Some people just like tea, or they think it's good for their throat. Even if it's not healing, it's permissible. All these type of things that are similar to that would be permissible, as long as it's also done derech bri'im. In other words, healthy people would do this too. Alright, let's begin with some examples of what you can do and what you cannot do. Splinter. Somebody has a splinter. You can remove it, because by removing the splinter, you're not healing. Remember what we said before? It's healing that's the issue over here. But if what you're doing is not healing, the first example was drinking something that everybody drinks. This example is removing something which, by removing it, you're not accomplishing anything. All you're doing is, you want the pain to go away. That's not called healing. You're not healing the wound. You want to take away the problem. So you can remove a splinter. You can also remove not only a splinter, but what do you call the bee's, the stinger. You can remove that too, from the bee. No problem. You're not healing here. You can easily remove it. Now, when I say easily remove, that's where it begins to become tricky. If what you're going to do to remove that stinger is going to cause blood to come out of your finger, then you can't do it. Because you cannot take blood out. You cannot wound yourself. You cannot puncture yourself. Well, you have an idea of what you're going to do. If the splinter is sticking out, you can just grab it, fine. If you have to go dig for it, you're going to hurt yourself. Right, we're going to talk about that. Dangerous, we have, Baruch Hashem, enough examples. We're going to get to that. Right now we're talking about a simple situation. You have a simple stinger, there's no danger. You want to remove it, fine, but you have to be careful not to take blood out, not to injure yourself, not to perforate your skin. Cleaning a wound. There are many ways to clean wounds that are permissible on Shabbat. Using hydrogen peroxide is permissible because that does not cure the wound. What does that do? It disinfects. You don't want it to become infected. You never said that. So washing it in any liquid, as long as it's not a medicated liquid, with water, for example, no problem. What are you doing? You're not healing or curing it, you're just cleaning it. That's permissible. To prevent infection is fine. So what we're doing here is preventing, not healing. However, when you have a bloody finger, or anything that's bloody, blood, a little bit of blood that's coming out, there are some opinions that hold that you be careful not to immediately apply a tissue or something, a white or any color tissue, because you are dying. You're not out of color. Well, Hashem will talk about coloring in Shabbat. Food, for example, there's no coloring. If you cannot color a cloth, a towel, with a dye, right? Because that's food. When it comes to food, we're not concerned about coloring. No. In food, we're not concerned about coloring. And we'll talk about that with Hashem. But here, we're talking about real coloring. Red on white, or even worse, red on red. Now, 1 second. So what do? Some say we don't have to be that concerned because that's called lichluch. That's not called real coloring. When you are applying a clean cloth, clean handkerchief to blood, you are soiling the handkerchief. You're making it dirty. Right? So that's called lichluch. That's not called dyeing. That's not called coloring. Nevertheless, the Bet Yosef is mahmir. So what do? The best recommended solution, unless there's no other way around it, is to first wash it. Wash the wound of the blood underneath and immediately put a Band-Aid. In other words, don't use a clean cloth to remove or to clean the blood. First, just wash it with the water. Later on, if it gets a little bit bloody, that's not, you didn't do it. Right. That's even worse than white. Because white is called lichluch. White becomes dirty from red. Red does not become dirty as noticeably from red blood. So that's why red napkin is worse than a white napkin. It has nothing to do with the showing. We don't have the leniency of lichluch anymore. On white, it looks dirty. It's another color. That's the main difference between red and white. So the best thing to do if you're bleeding a little bit is first wash it underneath the water and then apply a Band-Aid. Now when you use a Band-Aid, you're allowed to tear the wrapper, by the way. You're allowed to put a Band-Aid on Shabbat. You're not healing. What are you doing? What does a Band-Aid do? It only protects the wound. You're allowed to protect the wound. Just like you're allowed to prevent infection, you're allowed to protect it, which is the same idea. So you're allowed to put Band-Aids on Shabbat, and you're even allowed to tear the wrapper of the Band-Aid on Shabbat. And Hashem will be talking about when you're allowed to tear on Shabbat. You just can't tear things on Shabbat. There are certain things you can tear, and this is one. Nevertheless, you should be careful not to tear where there are letters, if possible. They're all possible. But there's no problem to open that wrapper and to get your Band-Aid out and apply it on the wound. Well, we'll have quite a few more examples soon. Healing means applying or drinking any medication that is intended to cure you of the illness that you have. For example, like aspirin. Those are preventative maintenance. Right? You're protecting the wound from infection. No. When you put a Band-Aid, you're not healing the wound. The wound eventually will heal by itself. Right, but that does not heal the wound. The maaseh itself, the act of putting a Band-Aid or washing the wound with hydrogen peroxide, it does not heal the wound. It protects it, it disinfects it, it doesn't allow for infection to build up. It's called preventative. I'm going to give you another example soon of what's real preventative versus real healing in a moment. Yes? No, you're talking about pain right now. A painkiller, as a painkiller. What? Right, but we're talking about illness right now. I'm going to talk about the various other examples of what's permissible and what's not. But any medication that you take that will cure the body of an illness is not permissible, unless, of course, it's one of the exceptions. Thank you very much for reminding me. When you're putting the Band-Aid, you can't use any creams. No creams. No. If it's a medicated, then you can't use it. You can't use it, right? Because it's medicated. It's going to heal the wound. Right? So therefore you cannot put, now, if there has to be some sort of cream there, right, on the wound, as we'll see that there are times that you may have to use a cream, then it's best to put it on the Band-Aid and not to put it directly on the hand or foot. Because there's a problem with smearing. Okay? So if you have to, if there's a situation where you are allowed to use the cream, then of course put it on the Band-Aid instead of putting it directly on the skin and smearing it. So that's another problem. It has nothing to do with healing. It has to do with smearing. Okay, blisters. With blisters, there's something which is prohibited and there's something which is permissible. If all you're doing by opening a blister is to air it out, it's a sumidoraita. It's prohibited by the Torah. So that's for a different reason. You cannot just open a blister to air it out and have it heal. But if your intention is to just take the pus out because it's to relieve the pressure of the blister, that's permissible. Just don't make sure that after the pus has come out, that you don't continue squeezing the blood more. So if you want to pick it, so to relieve the pressure, to release the pus that has accumulated, that's fine. What you cannot do is open it up just to air it out and let it go. What? Where's that about? Underneath? You mean beneath the skin? Yeah, of course. Yeah. But if you want, all you want to do is get the pus out, it's permissible, it's fine. Okay, bandages we spoke about, how to do it. Can you force yourself to vomit? Now, how do you vomit? There's two ways. Either by taking over-the-counter stuff that they sell, right? Or by doing it yourself with your finger. With your finger, it's okay. You ate something, you don't feel good, you want to force yourself with your finger with a spoon, that's fine. But you cannot use a medication. Drink something which is formulated for this, because that's a form of medication, right? In case you need to do that, that's fine. Okay, powder. Let's say your feet are very, sweaty. You want to apply some powder to absorb the wetness. That's fine, because all you're doing is absorbing the wetness. But if that powder is a medicated powder to treat athlete's foot, that you cannot use. That you cannot use on Shabbat. But that's medication. If it's medicated, if something is medicated, you can't use it. If all you want to do is just to put a little bit of powder to absorb the wetness, that's okay. That's not medication. That would be something which would be permissible. And the same is with deodorants. Deodorants, even though you might claim they're antifungal, right? Antibacterial. There's no issue whatsoever. It's permissible as long as it's a spray and not a stick. So on Shabbat, if you want to use some sort of deodorant, you can use the roll-on. You can use the roll-on with the liquid, or you can use a spray. Do not use the stick. Why? Eventually we'll talk about what the problem is with sticks. The similar problems that we have with solid soap as opposed to liquid soap. Yeah, right. You cannot, because it's a form of medication. And any way you do it, whether it's in an ointment, or a spray, a liquid, or an aspirin, medication is medication. Unless it's one of those exceptional situations where the person, of course, needs to. And we'll talk about that soon. But we'll talk about just in general right now. What's called refuah and what's called not refuah, not healed. Cotton in the ear, right? You have some problem in the ear and you want to put some cotton, it helps you. You're not curing it. And according to the rabbis, you're even allowed to walk with that cotton in the street. You're not afraid you're going to take it off, to remove it. So that small piece of cotton is okay for it to be. What? No, because it has a use. Okay, now we come to a difficult situation. One of the most difficult problems is toothache, right? That's one of the most difficult, it's considered by the rabbis a very bad way of suffering. Stomachache and toothache. Not as much as toothache and stomachache, unless it's a migraine maybe. So with a toothache, one of the ways to deal with a toothache is to deaden the nerves by drinking whiskey, okay? Now, is that permissible? Why not? Why? Aren't you curing it? You're numbing the nerve. Very good, you're paying attention, Baruch Hashem, yeah. Because that's called derech habri'im. People who are healthy drink whiskey too, but that does not include women. Women don't drink whiskey. Yeah, when there's a toothache, you drink whiskey. Same thing. Any alcoholic drink that will help you, yeah. And it's not really called a real refuah. It's not really, you're not curing it. Because what are you doing? You're making it numb. All you're doing is making one of those nerves numb. You're not healing it. It's going to come back later, right? So it's okay, it's permissible. And people drink it. So also this is not refuah. You're not curing it, it's permissible. What if you have constipation? Can you take prune juice? They say it helps. Right? Why? Sure. You can take prune juice because that's not, in any way curing the problem. It's just making things go smoother. Yeah. The same thing would be if somebody has diarrhea. He's not allowed to take medication for it unless it's a major problem. But he would be allowed to eat those types of foods that help bind. They're called binders, like rice. Right? Yeah, if it helps, are you curing it? No, because that's something that healthy people eat anyway. Even though the after effect is that it might help in the stomach. That's not your real intention. Even though that's what you want, but healthy people eat that too. Okay, let's go over to the second side. Vitamins. There's different kinds of vitamins. There are vitamins that are to make you healthier. And there are vitamins to prevent, like supposedly vitamin C prevents you from getting a cold. Alright? So if it's a vitamin that its purpose is to build up something in your body, your immune system, right? It may not be a real cure then, right? But if it's a particular vitamin that helps you combat a certain disease, right? Then it's a problem. You should not take it on Shabbat. So it's best to avoid vitamins on Shabbat altogether, because there's all sorts of them out there. You don't know what each one does. It's a multivitamin, right? And some of them are closer. They resemble much more like a form of medication in what they do and what they accomplish. And others are simply preventative. They may be permissible, but you can hold back one day without having them. Now we come to the point that I mentioned to you before. In order for you to understand what preventative is, I'm going to give you the classic example of a situation where, on the one hand, it would be a surah, on the other hand, it would be the exact same thing. Let's say you have a heartburn. Can you take Tums? No, because you are going to deal with the problem. But what if you know that what you're about to eat will give you a heartburn? Can you take the Tums before? The answer is because you're not curing anything. All you're doing is preventing it. Yeah, you don't take it after, but if you want to take it before, yeah, because you don't want to get into a problem. You don't want to have this headache that's going to come about because of this activity that you're going to do, right? Or whatever other situation that you're going to run into, right? You're allowed to take this to prevent something from happening, that you're not curing it, and it does not give the appearance. What you have sometimes is situations that give the appearance as though you're curing. That you want to avoid too. So in this case, you know yourself that what you're doing is to prevent it. You're not doing it to cure, then it's permissible. Yeah, that's this category down here. We'll get to that. Yeah, that's all this. I'll put a line over here. That's one of the most important parts of tonight's, we're going to get to that soon. Okay, braces. Braces, somebody needs braces, he's allowed to put them on Shabbat, right, to keep his teeth straight. Not really, no, you're talking about something else. I'm talking about the braces that, the retainers, not braces, okay. Those that you can remove and put on, that's also not a problem, because you are not healing it. You're just making sure they stay in place. Put ice on, you were burnt a little bit. Cool it off to make you feel good, to soothe that pain. That's not a problem either. You're not healing the wound by putting ice. Alright, exercise we spoke about before. Antibiotics. Now before we get into the real serious situation, there are opinions that hold that any medication that needs to be taken over a period of 10 days, like most antibiotics. You take it for 10 days, and you can't miss a day, supposedly. I think nothing happens if you miss a day on some situations. But anyway, anything which is significant, that you need to have that full antibiotic, you're allowed to take it even though one of those days is going to follow Shabbat. So because continuity here is important, you need to take it one day after another, and you need to take the full 10 days, then you can take it on Shabbat too. Now you will see why antibiotics is usually not a problem anyway on Shabbat, because most people who take antibiotics have a serious problem. But this is another rule that in some ways is a leniency, that if you have to take something because you need to take it for 10 days, then even though one of those days is Shabbat, it's permitted. Okay, now we're going to get into the most difficult part of all. These were, when we saw our basic rules, generalizing some very familiar situations that occur. But now, we need to discuss how to go about treating situations that arise that require immediate attention. Okay, we said that there's a Gzerah D'Rabbanan. This is by rabbinic decree. You can't use medication because it resembles grinding. You may come to grind. That's the problem of using medication. However, at times one needs to. So I divided it up into 5 categories of when and how to do things depending on what you have. Category number 1 is called small pain. Number 2, a little sick. Number 3, a lot of pain. Number 4, very sick. Number 5, dangerous. What's small pain? A small little headache. A little cold. You're sneezing. Your hands are a little bit dry, or your lips, in the weather. It's a little bit of discomfort. Okay? Nothing is permissible here. Nothing means nada in Spanish. Can't take any medication. You wait till Motzei Shabbat. And hopefully, that's all it is small pain. So there's no heter to do anything. And that is the basic category where most of these that we spoke about apply. You can't use it. However, what if somebody's a little sick? What is a little sick? Little sick means that he has a flu, right? Or he has a big headache. What else? Or he's just not feeling well. He's not functioning right. Then he's allowed to have a goy do something for him midrabanan. That goy is allowed to prepare something for him or to give him something that whatever he's doing is only a asur midrabanan by rabbinic. The goy cannot do something midoraita. The goy cannot travel for him, do anything which is asur according to Torah. Because he's only a little bit sick, he's allowed to do something for him which is midrabanan. The next 2 are going to be the most common one. A lot of pain or very sick. A lot of pain is a migraine headache. It would be a lot of pain. You would be able to do something yourself, the shinui, the change, or use a goy to do something midrabanan. Okay, we're only talking about midrabanan here, that which is permissible by rabbinical decree, like medication. It would be permissible for you to take it if you're very sick, right? Alidei shinui, or through a goy midrabanan. If somebody is very sick, the category of very sick is described in the halakha as you basically are going to be in bed for most of the Shabbat. You can't walk around, right? You don't feel well at all. You're not functioning right. You're very sick, right? And this includes, by the way, pink eye. There are certain things that are included in very sick. The pink eye. Shinui would be doing it not the regular way, depending on what you like, mixing it with food perhaps, things like that. Depending what it is that you're doing, depending what's involved. Sometimes, basically you can't use a shinui, and you're going to take a tablet. I'll talk about shinui a little bit more when we get to, actually it applies to very sick, so I'll talk about it now. A real shinui could apply with people who suffer from all sorts of illness on a regular basis, and they're going out and they need to carry their medication with them. That would be a typical example of shinui. It's not so much how you take it, but it's what's involved. So if you have chest pains, right, you have a heart problem, I'm not going to use the word you. One has a heart problem, right? He suffers from something that he needs to take this all the time, but he walks to shul. He's allowed to carry that medication with him, alidei shinui, not in his pocket, his hat, his sock, somehow bishinui. So that would be an example of shinui. So that's called very sick. A person who needs medication at all times, he's very sick. For somebody who's very sick, you can do it bishinui, or a goy can do something for you which is a melacha deoraita, for somebody who's very sick. So that's the difference between very sick or just a lot of pain. In very sick, a goy is allowed to do a melacha deoraita. Very sick. Bishinui. In other words, like carrying that medication that I gave you as an example. What? Yes. With pinka, you would be able to put the ointment in the eye. Exactly. I wrote down a few examples of what very sick would be. Major flu, not just a small. Chicken pox, measles, migraine headache, major toothache. A stomachache would be a lot of pain, right? But it depends. Sometimes it could cross over. Very sick is basically somebody who's in bed. Somebody who's what we know as really sick. He's or he has an illness that recurs and he needs his medication with him, right? That's very sick. As opposed to just having a lot of pain, where you wouldn't be able to use a goy to do a melacha deoraita if somebody's in a lot of pain. But in the Rabbanan, you can use a goy from the Rabbanan. But the big difference here is that for a person who's really sick, in bed, with the flu, major flu, or even beginning hepatitis, is a good example, beginning hepatitis. Not, if it's already advanced, it could be takana. The beginning stages, all of this, chickenpox, you can use a goy to cook something, do something deoraita. Alright? So the shinui that you basically come across would involve perhaps carrying for the most part. To carry the shinui, somebody who's very sick or has a... Alright, dangerous, pikuach nefashot. It's a big mitzvah for anybody who's involved in a situation where somebody is in a dangerous situation to immediately do whatever is necessary for him. Do not wait to ask for goy to call anybody. You do it yourself. Whether your wife is about to give birth, whether it's somebody who's just very sick, then you have to use your judgment sometimes, right? Because you can't tell. If you're ever in doubt, but you suspect that this could be very dangerous, you're mechalel Shabbat. Now, when there is a little bit of leeway, for example, the woman is having contractions, so she's not going to necessarily deliver now, you can call a taxi. You don't have to go yourself. You have a little bit of time. Just make sure you have your money ready with you. You can't take a change. So either pay with a credit card or a check. It's better, right? So we're going to get to that. How do you deal with goyim? How do you deal with a taxi driver when you're allowed to take a taxi? How about going back home from the hospital under what to take a taxi? Can you take a taxi instead of walking? We'll talk about that at some other point. In the meantime, you just need to know that if it's sakanat nefashot, you don't even wait for it, you do it yourself. And it's a big mitzvah. And there are situations where it's a sakanat nefashot. For example, I'm going to go to the end. If it involves poison, if it involves being bitten by an animal that may have rabies, or being stung by a scorpion, or being hit with a metal rod in a very, very strong way where there might be problems with tetanus, or major broken bones, especially if the bones are sticking out. We're not talking about just a bone that's out of place, dislocated. That's not a major sakanat nefashot necessarily. A fracture in the skull, compound injuries they would be called. This could be sakanat nefashot. Another important, let me just finish because we're running out of time. A major rule in sakanat nefashot also is something called any internal injury, internal bleeding, anything beginning with the gums of the teeth and inwards
can be sakanat nefashot. So unless it's a very minor thing, there's a lot of bleeding in the gums, major infection in the teeth, the area of, then you may have to take an spread. That's a problem. So you have to be a little familiar with medicine to know what the problem is and what's not. And it's always best to consult with somebody who's familiar. But when in doubt, that's what you need to do. There's a question about loss of limb. The only danger here is he may lose his hand. The Jew is not allowed to do melacha d'oraita. So the only time a Jew is allowed to do d'oraita is pikuach nefesh. This is not pikuach nefesh. This is just a loss of a limb. Loss of limb. A hand. He may lose his hand if you don't do something quickly. So the Jew is not allowed to do a melacha d'oraita. He can do a d'Rabbanan, but not a d'oraita to save a limb. He's not saving a life. He's saving a limb. You can, of course, ask the goy to do everything that's necessary, the ambulance and the doctors and everything, but you cannot do the melacha d'oraita on a loss of a limb. Unless it's pikuach nefesh. That's the big difference. So whenever it's an injury that it appears that it could be dangerous, something internal, right? A major wound, right? Then it's sakanat nefashot. Of course, but Yom Kippur is a whole different idea. But similarly, sure. Okay, sleeping pills. If you need to take them because you're extremely tired and you can't fall asleep, I left that over. But you cannot use a chiropractor. You shouldn't use it on Shabbat because any type of physiotherapy or chiropractic is similar to healing. It should be avoided. But regular massages, if it's not very strong massage, is permissible. Okay, pregnancy. Anything that involves pregnancy for the health of the child and for the mother is mutar to take while she's pregnant. Fever is a very important area to be careful with. If the fever goes over 102, especially with little children and elderly people, that's called sakanat nefashot. There can be a sakanat nefashot. So with fever, you have to watch out, especially if it's a high fever and there's some other problem that other problem you don't know what it is. If you know, it's just high fever because he or he's teething, that may not be a problem. As long as you see that the medication you're giving him, Tylenol, is bringing down the fever. But you have to be careful because high fever can be dangerous. Okay, I think we've covered the basic examples of these situations. Antibiotics that I mentioned before, over 10 days, is a leniency. Anytime a person has to take an antibiotic or medication prescribed by the doctor because he has a problem, right, and it's a problem that falls into the category of a lot of pain or very sick, then for sure he can take it. Because anybody who has a lot of pain or who's very sick is allowed to take all these medications that we spoke about before. The only issue, whether he's very sick or it's dangerous, is whether a melacha can be done, or whether the melacha is the Rabbanan or d'oraita. So midrabanan, it would not be a problem if there's a lot of pain involved. As long as he does it with it, because you know it's applicable in that case. With medication, you can basically take it if it's very sick. Somebody who's just a little bit in pain cannot take anything. So there's sometimes, of course, a question of how much pain is it? Is it a lot? Is it a little? You have to use your judgment. Very sick is basically considered somebody who would be in bed, who would not be able to function. Whose headache is very powerful, very, very strong. Then you can take Tylenol, can't function. If it's just a little bit of pain, then you wait till Motzei Shabbat. Whether it's an ointment, medication, smear, or to swallow, all that would be it. Yes, Hot Shabbat. So, best thing is to go lay down in pain. The issue of medication is obviously melacha, the Rabbanan. It's a form of tochen, or it's a gzirah. It's not a form of tochen because we don't do tochen, but you may come to tochen. It's a gzirah, and because of that, the rabbi did not allow for it. But because it's the Rabbanan, they did allow for exception. Obviously, somebody's pikuach nefashot, there's no questions asked. You can do just about everything. You don't even wait for a goy to help you. You do it yourself. You drive yourself, why did you have to? But with the other situation, that's the time, that's one of the typical examples in Shabbat when you use something called a Shabbos goy. You've heard the term of Shabbos goy? People ask me, Rabbi, how could you not tell a goy what to do? There's a clown on Shabbat, whatever you can't do, you can't tell a goy to do. That's true, except in a few situations where you are allowed to. That's where the Shabbos goy came into be. For those situations where we cannot do something ourselves, but it's something which is midrabanan, and telling a goy is midrabanan, so you have two midrabanan. It may be permissible under certain circumstances. But sometimes you can tell a goy to do something which is d'oraita. The typical example is choleh she'en bo sakana. He's very sick, but there's no danger. Because if there is danger, then you can do it yourself. But choleh she'en bo sakana, in other words, a person who's very sick, has a major flu, measles, and the like, or something like pink eye that needs immediate attention. You can have a goy make the phone calls and whatever is necessary, even if it's a melacha d'oraita. So these are the basic things you have to keep in mind when treating yourself or treating children at home. What can be done, what cannot be done. Whether it's a wound, bleeding, you have to determine if this is dangerous or not, or if this is something very small. And you have to be careful. Sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry. But things that we are familiar with, we feel more comfortable with. If that which we did not know, then you quickly ask someone. There are quite a few ways to know if something is dangerous, but I don't want to get into all the details. Various types of wounds that the rabbis consider extremely dangerous, or that you don't take a chance, you don't wait. The various poisons, the various things that you may be able to survive. But people are allergic to something. And if somebody's allergic to a particular sting, you immediately take him. Because we don't know what kind of reaction. You don't take any chances in the situation. If you have in doubt,